Okay. Welcome back to The Period Feels. I'm Neddy, and I'm so excited to welcome our very special guest today, Priscilla Tsai, the founder and CEO of cocokind. Thank you so much for joining us. We met very briefly at an event in New York, and I feel like I was just info dumping all of the things I loved about sustainability at cocokind. So I'm really excited to sit down today and actually get to ask you about your sustainability journey.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and a big fan of what you all are doing, and happy to chat about all things sustainability.
Alrighty. I feel like a good place to start with cocokind and sustainability is kind of like the sustainability in progress mindset. If you wouldn't mind kind of like breaking that down for our listeners and talking a little bit about how cocokind perceives sustainability.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like the whole how consumer brands really act like with sustainability in mind has changed so much throughout the years. When I first started this business, which is over 7 years ago, which is a long time, really the conversation wasn't really there. But if it was there, it was about packaging and really packaging only. And so it was, our decision to use glass bottles or recycled plastic or other versions of plastic as much as possible. And so over the years, what we learned, and every month, every day, every year, there's like a different learning, was that, it's so much more than packaging. Like packaging is only one element of sustainability. There's, your carbon emissions per product. There's your entire supply chain, which is way more than packaging. Transportation. There's, education involved, like what the consumer actually does with that packaging, et cetera, et cetera. And it just like, as the business has grown, we've really made sure it's our responsibility to learn with that growth on how we're contributing to our sustainability efforts. And so it's almost like the more we learn, the less we know. And so in that way, I think it's just our philosophy is sustainability in progress, meaning, you can't ever declare victory with sustainability. And truly we don't know what we don't know in so many ways right now. And so it's important to stay humble and to allow adaptability to, with more information that and more research that comes online, that you are able to continuously adapt and make the best decisions for your company as well as for the environment. And so, that's kind of, I think it's a mindset that we've just really lived, where we know that, sustainability isn't just one thing, and there's just so much to learn.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing that I personally have really enjoyed about following cocokind as a brand for so long. I think I had I'll call it a sustainability awakening in college, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And your brand kind of rampaged through my friend group, and we all kind of discovered cocokind at the same time. And what we really liked about the brand was that there's this huge educational component to it. So while you guys are learning these new things, your social media is very much here's this is a new packaging decision or a new sustainability decision that we need to make. And we're explaining to you how it works, what it is, why we're doing it, if there's going to be a cost increase, why that's relevant. And then almost even asking your buyers to lean in and say, is this something that you guys want? Is it something you don't want? And then the overwhelming response is always that your consumers are well, yes, we're going to take the most sustainable option. Mm-hmm. And recently you had that campaign as well, where you had a base price, and then you could pay more based on how sustainable you'd like your purchase to be. Could you tell us a little bit about that campaign?
So it was actually more on a pricing breakdown and pricing transparency. And so it was less about sustainability and more about the whole ecosystem of what goes into pricing. I mean, it is important with sustainability to have the knowledge. And I think it's important for, any brand that is claiming to have sustainability efforts to have as much of that transparency as possible. So we think about sustainability and transparency all in the same wavelength. So even though it wasn't directly hitting on like the sustainability element, it's what we're talking about is like the breakdown of pricing for your beauty products and allowing people to understand what they're really paying for, which in our case, cocokind is a superior formula and quite simple packaging that has a lower carbon emitting footprint. But, we're not a brand, for instance, that's going to pay, a large amount on custom packaging for many reasons, but especially because of the carbon emissions and the cost, where we, really feel like it's important to invest in our formulas, not on the bottle. And so, that decision and explaining that concept to people, which people might not understand, right? That like a lot of times when you're buying cosmetics or skincare, you're not paying for what's inside, you're paying for the outside. And that is a sustainability message, right? Like that is for people to understand what they're paying for, and knowing like what the outside contributes to your carbon emissions versus inside, what the outside contributes to the final price versus the inside. All of that is super important. So for us, it's very clear, we don't invest in, custom packaging unless it has to do with lowering our carbon emissions.
That's awesome. I also think that like with just thinking about this messaging in like broad terms on all your socials, if I tried to pick like a handful of brands that were kind of messaging the same, I could not. So what was kind of the inspiration for you all to start doing this? Because I think there isn't really even one inspiration brand for you guys. Like you were kind of the gold standard in this movement.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I think for us, we're always just thinking like consumers, like what could empower a consumer to like just feel like they have more knowledge to make a good decision. And there's so much cloudiness. Like a lot of times brands and consumers are at arm's length from each other, right? Like there's like this wall where it's like brands are like, oh, I'm not going to share too much about our formula. I'm not going to share too much about our pricing because the consumer won't understand it. They won't understand, why we need to make a base level profit, why we need, why your formula is only a small part of your overall cost. Like they won't understand all these things. And our belief is actually the consumer will. And if you explain your decisions, and of course we're proud of the decisions we make, and we have that level of, pride to then be transparent about it, then we believe that the consumer actually will really appreciate that information and feel empowered by that. And of course, like I said, we're proud of all of that we have to, show behind the curtains. And so I think that's where our number one assumption is different than most other brands. And so with that, that's just we always push ourselves on like, how can we, really like let down the curtains a little bit and give the consumer as much information as he or she needs to know to be empowered. So that's, you're right that like, we really don't look, side to side for inspiration. We just kind of ask ourselves these questions and are continuously pushing ourselves.
That's so amazing. Like that by far my favorite thing about the brand.
Thank you.
As like a brand that, August is so young and we're really trying to be as transparent as possible, mostly following your lead. What is like a seemingly simple certification or simple thing that to the average consumer that actually took a really long time on the back end to do in terms of sustainability? Because I think there is a disconnect where people say, oh, well, why can't this brand just do, be, I don't know, cruelty-free or, a B Corp, but behind the scenes, a lot more goes on. So it's kind of something that to you guys looked simple, but took a very long time. Yeah.
I mean, so much of it takes long. Like we calculate carbon emissions per product per use. We have that on the side of every box. I mean, that took a year and a half, for, only 15 of our products. So it took a long time to trace back and to make, as strong of assumptions we could when we didn't have the known variables, and put it all together and work with our suppliers, work with our fillers to make sure that the numbers are based on as much integrity as possible. A lot of digging and just gathering of information. So that took a long time. I'd say like in general, we get asked a lot of the time about various certifications generally. I'm actually not a fan of certifications. Like, I think that's a new thing for me, breaking news, because I think we do as much work that is needed for any certification out there, but people also don't realize that to have those certifications, you pay a lot of dollars. And I think that with the way that we present information, we'd rather show the facts than have a logo. And a lot of times a logo don't tell the full, they just don't tell the full story. So, a good example in the sustainability world is the climate neutral. There's so many different, certifications these days. I'm not saying they're bad to do, because certainly they're better to do than nothing. But a lot of times it disincentivizes companies to make the best decisions, because economically there's a path you can take to get a logo, or there's a different path which might require more time, more research, more, carving your own path and really figuring out what's out there in order to make that work. So, in an example of climate neutrality, this is something we talked about recently too, where you as a company could have, to get climate neutrality, of course, you have to measure your carbon footprint, and then you have to, quote unquote, offset it by purchasing carbon credits, right? So let's say you as a company have 2,000 tons of carbon emission to offset. If you're going for, some certification, and the certification says you need to be at, net zero. What you're going to do is you're going to most likely pick the cheapest option to get there. So credit quality can vary significantly to projects. So some projects are literally $2 per carbon ton, and some projects are $200. And so the $2 and $200, they're varying by quality. You can have some that are short in nature. They're not really, benefiting us long term as an environment, as a society, as a world. And the ones that are really expensive, maybe frontier technologies that have more potential but need more funding right now. And so what happens if your one goal is to achieve climate neutrality as defined by some of these certifications, you're, a small business like ours is, going to choose the most economic option, and you're going to choose the cheapest projects to fund. So literally there's no standardization of what projects to fund. So a company could pay for that same, 2,000 tons of carbon emissions to offset. You could pay $20,000 or you could pay $200,000. Like, obviously, what do you think companies will choose? So our stance is that like we have a fund that basically we allocate based on the majority of funds go to longer term projects that we believe in, and then we do recognize a need for shorter term projects too that are most oftentimes more affordable, but we primarily invest in the longer term, whether that means we hit net zero or not. And that allows us to make the best decisions about, the absolute dollar amount, and also making sure we're just investing in the right long-term projects. So that's just an example of like certifications can oftentimes like lead you to one objective and one objective only. While they are better than nothing, absolutely, they, don't always tell the full story. So if you go on our website right now, we don't have a climate neutrality certification, And that is a choice as a brand that, like, if you looked at our product versus another product that has a climate neutrality like certification, it is a choice that we're making, that like we have to do way more work to explain that to consumers. But we ultimately feel like it's the best thing to do. So, that's also why we educate so much, is because like we really dig into why we do things. And a lot of times it's not so simple, and you have to, really like, kind of explain, the real behind, some of these things that consumers see a lot of the times.
I think we can totally agree with you on that one, on it being very disheartening when we've only been alive as a business for about almost a year now. So it's a lot of these certifications don't even let you apply for them until like 2 years out and things like that. But it's so disheartening when you're trying to do, I guess, the best with what you have or right by the environment. And then the immediate consumer response will be like, oh, well, you're not certified this or certified that, when you have to like re-educate. And like sometimes people are going to see both both descriptions, but not always. And it's like super interesting that you bring up carbon neutrality, because that's something that we've been also like posting about a lot on TikTok. And I saw your recent viral TikTok about that as well, where we just kind of have beef with people being like, oh, okay, like you purchase something, here's a tree, and not actually explaining at all the process of carbon offsetting, and kind of like giving brands that aren't trying as hard as I feel like we are to be sustainable kind of like an out. So I wanted to ask you if you had any kind of red flags or green flags for consumers listening when they go into a new brand to kind of look out for, to make sure the brand is practicing sustainability properly, rather than just kind of throwing out some random certifications or using greenwashing type language to mask some not so nice behaviors.
Yeah. And just taking a step back, I think the reality is it's really difficult. You know, I rewind back to us 2-3 years ago, and like, we thought planting trees was the best solution. Like, we didn't have that. We didn't dig into it, you know, and then of course we dug into it and started doing research. And we were like, oh my God, there's like so many other projects, and there's long-term projects, short-term. Sometimes trees don't even survive up to the point where they're actually, you know, netting benefit to the environment. And so there's so many issues with, you know, that solution in itself. But, you know, I think that's something that honestly we didn't know, and we heard about it and we were like, okay, great. This sounds like a great option to be, you know, to purchase credits from, and to make sure we're planting trees. And so, you know, I think it's sometimes like greenwashing isn't necessarily greenwashing. It's just where people are in the learning curve, you know? And so at any given time, you could be greenwashing, you know, but is the intention that? Not necessarily, you know? So I think it's also, there are red flags, and there's certainly companies who just care about that. But I also think it's important to give leeway to, you know, the fact that all companies, including cocokind, including the biggest companies in the world who are dedicating multi-million dollars to sustainability efforts, are also still learning, you know? So, you know, I think that's important. But when we think about green flags, I think it's, you know, really trying to see the facts behind the words that you see. So when someone says we're sustainable, when someone says we're net zero, like, are they explaining that in a way that is not just about packaging, it's not just about ingredients, or it's about whole supply chain? When they talk about purchasing offsets, like, I mean, there's some baseline, like if someone's trying to purchase $2 per credit per ton of carbon emissions, like that's just like, it's just not really going to go that far, you know? I think the cheapest project that we found across the board was like $10-14 per ton of carbon emissions. So when I see companies, you know, a lot of times people will display the information, and you know, right now we're at the onus is on the brands, because the consumer is not there yet. The consumer doesn't know what we know, right? About like, oh, they don't know, is it $2, $200, $2,000? I have no idea as a consumer, right? So that's the thing, is that it's difficult. But so, you know, it's just kind of understanding, like, okay, you're purchasing $2. What type of project is that going for? Is that spending on? And, you know, what is the research behind what they're doing to make sure that offset is real? So it's just about like being able to answer, you know, the harder questions and digging in a little bit more. And I also think it's just, you know, I read something from, I think it was Ghani the other day. I think they do a really good job with explaining sustainability efforts too. And they said, like, we're not sustainable. We're just the most sustainable versions of ourselves. And I think that was like really impactful. And I took a lot of inspiration actually from them. And on that quote, because I think that sums up exactly, you know, I've written emails to our email list before on, you know, we are not sustainable. But, you know, at the end of the day, we're still putting out skincare products, you know, like these are our products. And so, you know, we're in that industry. We're in that industry to not irresponsibly, but to innovate. And to, when we do that, it's putting out new products. And like, you know, of course, you could argue that in itself is not a sustainable product, period, end of story, you know? So I think it's just important for people to like approach it with that humility. You know, I think it's also just important to, when I think like no one is inventing the wheel here, you know, especially a company our size. Like I think it's really important to like credit those that you get inspiration from. So our whole like carbon neutrality thesis that was based on 2 large reports that came out of Microsoft and Shopify, who, you know, spend tens of millions of dollars on this. And we are not a company that can do that. You know? You have to be honest about that. And so, you know, we're not going to pretend like we're inventing some thesis up. We're going to credit that, and we're going to use that research out there. So that's another thing too, is like when I see some of that, sometimes it's like, you know, you can't don't brand sustainability. You know what I mean? It's sustainability is open source. Like you have to be open, and you have to, you know, pull inspiration where you can and credit that and show people the research of, you know, if you're saying Shopify, if you're saying Microsoft, tell them that, you know, and so that they could read those reports to be educated themselves. But, you know, I think that's important where there's a certain element of companies that are trying to brand it. And it's like, you know, I don't believe in that either.
I think it's so interesting that you bring up that point about Gani being the most sustainable versions of themselves. Like, I think it's worth to jump in and mention here, like, obviously August is a single-use product, like, but we also, when we were building our product, went in and asked consumers, like, what is the product that you feel safest and most comfortable with on your period? And everyone overwhelmingly said tampons and pads. Yeah. So the options like Flex cups and Diva cups and things like that have been around for years and years, but they still just haven't really reached that critical mass and turned over yet. So we were we kind of decided to meet people where they were at and take a product that they know, love, trust, and make it some more sustainable, or like the most sustainable that we possibly can. And I think that that's a really important note, where it's like, we admit to ourselves every day, like, hey, we're not as sustainable as we could be. So we, even in the 1 year that we've been running, have made tiny little changes everywhere we've been able to like make our packaging from biodegradable to compostable, and then having to like educate and teach people as well what that means and what to do with it. And it's like a huge like inspiration, I guess, that everyone, like all these big brands, are also on this journey with us. And I think that it's a widely positive movement that brands are now switching to this like educational kind of format of, let's invite our consumer to lean in and learn about sustainability with us. And I'm so excited to hear about everything that all of us have in the works. I'm going to switch gears a bit, because I've been a long time hormonal acne sufferer myself for a very long time. And cocokind is probably the only brand where I can introduce a new product and it won't immediately make my skin freak out. So I did want to ask, like, other than the turmeric stick, which is Mo2, do you have any recommended skin regimens for our period hormonal acne sufferers in the community?
Yeah. So first, you know, our philosophy is like, it all starts with the healthy skin barrier and hydration. So that's partially why you can introduce a new product. And look, skincare is very personal. Like for you, it might be one thing, for someone else, it might not, you know, but generally, like that's what our consumer audience will notice, is that because our products are all designed for the skin barrier, there's not going to be as much of that like reactive period. So, you know, we really design all of our products. Even if you look at our Postbiotic acne serum, which has 1.5% salicylic acid, it also has a large amount of beta glucan in there to offset that, which beta glucan is a humectant ingredient, which brings in hydration to your skin. So we want to make sure that, you know, if you're using salicylic acid, that you're getting that hydration too. And it also has postbiotics in there to help the microbiome. And so, you know, every product is balanced. So even our AHA jelly, it's an AHA cleanser with 4%, which is not too strong whatsoever, but just helps mildly, you know, exfoliate as a cleanser. It has 14% humectants in it, again, just to bring in that hydration. So we always balance the actives with the like counterparting ingredients that can really make sure that your barrier stays intact. And people don't realize, like, because I was there too. And when I was dealing with severe hormonal cystic acne, college and in my early 20s in New York, I was completely destroying my skin barrier and using anything that I could, like the most harsh ingredients, and use like the frequency that like no one should ever use either. And it was at the point where I would put on lotion every day and my skin would sting, and I would do it in the dark because my eyes would water. And it was just a miserable experience. My face would get bright red, sting, eyes would water, and I'd be literally in the dark. And then 10 minutes later, it would calm down and I would just put so much makeup over it. Midday, it'd be flaking. I'd do that all over again at work. And such a miserable experience, physically and of course emotionally too. And it really was this idea that like, when I started cocokind, it was because I didn't realize it at the time, that it was like this, in fact, that I was doing, but it was really repairing my skin barrier with better ingredients, better formulations that were more nourishing. And so that's what I noticed that was really working for me. So half the battle is your skin barrier. When you have a healthy skin barrier, you have a healthier everything. Less breakouts, less dryness, less fine lines and wrinkles, like all that stuff. You're able to keep more hydration and your skin feels more comfortable. It looks more comfortable. It looks more glowy, all that stuff, And so people think that barrier is only a function once you destroy it, but barrier is actually the most important thing. Our belief is barrier is actually the most important thing to upkeep in order to really make sure that your baseline for your skin is just healthy. So, of course, the turmeric products, and then we just launched a turmeric illuminating solution, which is really amazing for brightening and gentle exfoliation. And then it's counteracted by oat, which is really calming. And then our postbiotic acne serum is great for breakouts or if people are breakout prone. You can actually use it when you're not breaking out. Like it's just a great hydrating serum. And then our Ceramide barrier serum is our best seller. And it's because people notice that exactly what I'm talking about. It's just, you really are supporting it. It's such an amazing hydrating, like everyday type of product to use. And people see so many varying benefits from it. So that product in particular is a great foundation that people can use.
That's awesome. So have you described too, when you would go through that kind of cycle of basically burning your skin off and then re-putting the products on? I was definitely there myself when I had horrible, like in my very early 20s, like when I was 21, I had horrible hormonal acne. Yeah. And I think one of the toughest things for me was I previously was not convinced that a more natural product or like a sustainable option that didn't have all of these harsh chemicals in it could do something for me. Like that was kind of like my own learning and unlearning that I had to do. And I think it's the same too when people look at August period care. They're like, well, it's like a cleaner version. It doesn't have plastic in it, whatever. How is that supposed to work for me? So how do you kind of like overcome that assumption that the more natural or sustainable product is somehow inherently worse, that a lot of consumers kind of have going in, like that they need these chemicals or things that are, normally there?
I mean, I think, in general, like everything is a chemical, so we use chemicals and water as a chemical. And so, we are very much of the philosophy of like our formulations are barrier supporting. We use a lot of botanical ingredients like the turmeric and the matcha and like ingredients that are just really interesting. We really believe in harnessing the powers of those types of ingredients. But we merge it with a lot of the very historical skincare ingredients that are known to be effective with that you'll see commonly out there, like a salicylic acid, et cetera. And so, we believe in merging the two, but so there's really not a question of like efficacy because our philosophy as it relates to efficacy is like, it's the same as, another company that might be using way higher percentages. But the difference is actually, it's maybe, there are some ingredients we do not use. But that really is, it really is about how we formulate more than anything versus like, some companies have a no list and that's it. Like, yes, we have a no list, but it's actually like, that's really not like the basis for how we formulate. We, we're a brand that like, instead of using 20% exfoliation acids, we use 7%. We're going to use a trio blend so that it's balance. So you get a little bit of a deeper exfoliation, but counteracted by a little bit of the surface level exfoliation. So it's never getting too deep. That's our turmeric solution. We use 3 different types of acids, different molecule sizes, so that it never gets to a point of irritation. So I think that's more, we actually believe that, like, you know, a little bit often is better than, you know, a lot, and then like burning your face off, and then, you know, having to recover your skin barrier and dealing with all that stuff. And then, you know, that's not our philosophy. It's really like a little bit often, and it really aligns with our skin barrier philosophy too. So that is more, you know, I guess like the anchor of how we formulate.
All right. I think that's pretty much everything I had to ask you, like, of my main questions. If you had any for us, perhaps, or any, you know, tips for a young brand starting out in the sustainability space, I would love to hear them. And then maybe we'll just wrap up the interview. Yeah, no,
I think I'm so impressed by everything that you all are doing. And it's about, like I said, like, you don't know what you don't know so much. And so much of the time, you know, of course, you're going to have the areas of expertise, but, you know, there's so much of starting a business, building a brand, being quote unquote sustainable, or having sustainability efforts. That's just about recognizing like what you don't know, but like that's half the battle. And then, you know, of course, like, searching vigorously for those resources that help you get there. So that's something that we have always been super humble about, and you're going to make mistakes along the way, plenty of them. And
I know,
you know, so it's about that resilience too, that, you know, every single person on the team needs, and as the people on the team build that resilience, the brand builds that as well through, you know, all the ups and downs and mistakes that will be made. So, but, you know, that's also just part of the journey of when you're trying to do something different, when you're trying to do something good, like, you're gonna end up, you know, going through a lot of that, but ultimately reach, you know, a stronger and better place.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Priscilla. It has truly been a treat to hear about sustainability from our inspo as well. We are definitely huge. We are all taking on the sustainability in progress mindset, and we will be cheering you on and following along with your content the whole step of our journey as well. We're so happy to have you more involved in August as we move forward.
I know, me too. I'm so excited for you guys. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.